to us with a PhD that he's currently pursuing. It's a joint two universities, so it's Central Michigan University and Newcastle, am I correct? He did his master's in 2013 working on Jacobite heraldry at Central Michigan University, and now his current project is looking at consumption in colonial American coffee houses.
Right, thank you. So today I will be presenting on the intersection between high church political interests and the political platform of the Stuart dynasty in exile, and also other high-ranking Jacobite officials. Part and parcel with that will also be an evaluation of the emerging notion of an English constitution after 1689, the limitations that has on not just political objectives within the rage of party between Whigs and Tories, but also more specifically within the Jacobite elite. So throughout the late 17th and early 18th centuries, Jacobite subversion to the post-1688 revolutionary government plagued peerage and ecclesiastical circles in England with many potential enemies. As Jacobites struggled to secure a consistent peerage structure, they formulated a constitutional position of their own for English political institutions. James II's Catholic regime ended forever Stuart power over Anglican institutions, and of course from that point forward, the exiled Stuarts' promises for reforming the Church of England are more or less pie-in-the-sky promises that will never be fully realized. And nevertheless, the Church would in fact remain a vast structure of immense power through the 17th century. Bishops appointed local officials of county administration and justice. The great dioceses of London and Winchester possessed rent rolls on an equal footing with that of a duke. Charles II expected his bishops to promote beneficial elections for administration and report on county policies. William Sancraft, the Archbishop of Canterbury from 1677 to 1691, believed passionately in a mystical reverence to monarchy and replaced no less than 22 out of 27 dioceses with royalist archbishops. Thus begins a unique attachment between high churchmen and Jacobite officials. And of course, this anxiety will only increase as the Stuarts go into exile. But the reverence for monarchy among high churchmen was driven by a belief in the divine right of kings. Divine right theory held that a king was ordained by God himself without the Pope's mediation, that he inherited the throne through hereditary legitimacy, the principle of hereditary right, that he was accountable to God alone for proper stewardship of his kingdom, and that subjects must passively obey him. By rights of an unchangeable ancient constitution or a historical precedent of power, high churchmen defended divine right and passive obedience in direct opposition to the Puritan argument, which emerged subsequently during the 17th century, that common law existed before the king. The Cambridge School has analyzed that particular theme. The Stuarts in exile appealed to this high church ideal with a political platform that would eventually address also, of course, revolutionary demands. Charles I's sacrificial place in the Church of England evolved into Jacobite mythology. His martyr image dominated the liturgy and iconography of the Restoration Church and symbolized Anglican piety at its sincerest level, or so as John Spur claims this. Paul Minot has extensively treated England's cultural and social Jacobitism and has argued that Jacobitism as a construct must include its sentimental and sympathetic recapitulations in culture, not merely its political forms. So we'll be sort of broadening our definition for Jacobitism to include cultural motifs, pageantry, and so on. Jacobite propagandists initiated an icon campaign through southern England, organizing Jacobite symbols around the royal Stuart claim. However, The revolutionary spirit that hung in the air in 1687 did not bode well for high churchmen. After James fled to France, Parliament offered the crown to William and Mary, Protestants from the Netherlands. Sancroft refused to recognize the succession and was removed from office along with 4 others. Their loyalty to the old regime started a new ecclesiastical and political faction known as the non-jurors, who believed the Church of England had apostatized since accepting the usurper for its head. The majority of the clergy took oaths of loyalty to William, but usually only as the de facto king, still honoring James as the de jure monarch. So you have this interplay here where high churchmen are actively engaging the new dynasty and yet still subscribing to older forms of ecclesiastical attachment. Unfamiliar with entrenched Anglicanism, William made the grievous political error of publicly appearing before the House of Lords and proposing a sudden and complete abolition of the Test Incorporation Acts, giving full-fledged toleration. His proposal was soundly defeated, the Comprehension Bill was blocked, and only the Toleration Act became law. This act essentially gave all Trinitarian Protestants who objected to church liturgy and government freedom of worship outside the church establishment. Even so, it only moderately addressed dissenter demands. Many strings were attached. Only those who swore oaths of allegiance or affirmed loyalty and declared against substantiation were included. Dissenting ministers had to subscribe to the Anglican Statement of Faith, the 39 Articles, in all but church government. Religious tests still remained in admissions to universities such as Oxford and Cambridge, as well as for office holding, public office holding, which remained very narrowly an Anglican monopoly. The House of Commons read its Declaration of Rights to William and Mary upon their accession, which defined in greater detail constitutional legality. First, the Declaration banned excessive fines and bail in the law courts. It prohibited cruel punishments. It stipulated that jurors be duly impaneled in treason trials, be freeholders, and denied a monarch's power to grant away fines and forfeitures which might be sentenced in an upcoming trial. Second, Parliament had to meet on a frequent basis. Freedom of speech was established in the House of Commons, and a monarch could not violate free elections by packing Parliament. Third, Parliament gained the power of the purse through the prohibition of levying money without its consent, and standing armies were forbidden unless Parliament consented. The Declaration became statute in 1689 as, of course, the enduring Bill of Rights, laying the foundations for universal rights of citizenship. Parliamentary reform followed with the Triennial Act of 1694, which established the general election every 3 years and hindered the monarch's ability to call and dispense parliamentary authority at will. These changes to the modern English state also altered the Stuart Court's platform for Jacobite political objectives in England, sort of a parallel English constitution going on here. Through a series of royal declarations entrusted to high-ranking Jacobite conspirators, the exiled court wished to print and disseminate a Jacobite political position in accord with the revolutionary settlement. As early as 1696, James wrote a liberal declaration in conjunction with his planned landing and invasion of England from Calais. The invasion never materialized and the declaration was never published. He died in 1701 without ever returning to England. James Francis Edward, or James III to his Jacobite supporters, developed the post-revolutionary stance of his court and among the entrusted leadership in the Tory party with the publishing of his political platform in 1715. James gave his declaration to Tory leader Lord Bolingbroke, who promised to circulate them through publishing houses in London. James also wrote letters to the universities of Oxford and Cambridge, which Bolingbroke would give to the university administration before circulating them in England. So there's a definite hierarchy in which the Jacobites are disseminating information from the Stuart court through loyal high church ranking officials, through the universities, the academies, and then, of course, lastly, through the publishing houses. However, Bolingbroke was detained in France longer than he expected, along with James Butler, the Duke of Ormond, who had opened up an English commercial treaty with France in the Tory ministry before beginning a secret correspondence with the Stuart court. Bolingbroke gave these letters to his aide, Ezekiel Hamilton, to publish in London. So things sort of get haywire, and you might as well publish them in the press when you can. By the 1745 campaign, Jacobite military officials spread James's and later Prince Charles's English and Scottish declarations in public house pamphlets through Scotland and northern England, and nobles read them publicly at market crosses. While Jacobite pamphlet materials circulated in the press through the 17th and 18th centuries, public readings of these Stuart declarations were reserved for primary periods of revolt. Accordingly, the Stuart political platform moved first through Tory Jacobite elite and secured their loyalty before it entered the public sphere. Tory politicians worried that Whig policies would threaten the constitutional settlement of 1688. In 1715, the Duke of Ormond echoed these concerns in his letter of the Duke of Ormond to all true lovers of the Church of England and their country, first published in London and sent even as far away as the Jacobite press in Perth. He condemned free thinking in the universities and called for a return to Anglican Christianity. Ormond brought spiritual and national significance to ecclesiastical affairs by stating that the persecution of the Church of England under the Hanoverian administration forced him to leave his native country and accept commissions as Commander-in-Chief of England under James III in, as he puts it, so glorious a cause as that of delivering their country from the foreign yoke imposed on them by the violence of a faction. The cause did not simply rest on hierarchical structure in church, peerage, or state, but in the entire country of England with its citizens. This was, therefore, a matter of national honour. It also depended on the spiritual health of its people. Ormond appealed to the orthodoxy of his audience's Christianity and the English character for support. He attacked political and ecclesiastical corruption. The authority of a pretended parliament made by false returns and bribery and the turning out of members lawfully chosen has been applied to the subversion of the Constitution. The Orthodox clergy have been discountenanced. The Socinians and freethinkers are encouraged under the pretense of moderation. The enemies of our religion are left at liberty to attack the most essential articles of it. Ormond believed that the essential articles of faith in the Anglican Church, which had set England apart from papal Europe as a Protestant and constitutional nation, were perishing under parliamentary secularism and Whig corruption. He continued, "The two famous universities have been contemptuously treated, and a project is now on foot to set up a new university with a design to destroy the old ones and to show their hatred to a liberal education and the seminaries of the Church." Ormond gave a conservative argument for Jacobitism which appealed to the very Christian identity of the people of England. Although national in its import, his call spoke to the very individuality of faith within each of his countrymen. Thus he called his efforts an enterprise on which everything which ought to be dear to them as Christians or Englishmen absolutely depends. The Marquis of Walton exhibited perfectly the sort of dedication to the cause which Ormond sought. He measured his capacity of obedience to James by what was consistent with a free-born Englishman and a Protestant religion, expressing his firm service to king and country. Among his following ready to join, Wharton described the loyalty of his fellow countrymen as having acknowledged at length your just and undoubted title to the crowns of your royal ancestors, an emerging sense of restoring the Anglican Church alongside the Stuart dynasty. For the Jacobite, this represented the perfect balance between conservative and liberal attachment. After the Glorious Revolution and its cry for the rights and liberties of Protestants, Stuart politics conceded wholeheartedly to the rhetoric and constitutional revisions of the Revolution. Stuart declarations to England used the basic terms of the Revolution, promising to leave undisturbed rights and liberties of the Protestant faith, to lessen tax burdens, secure property rights, and even perhaps curtail Roman Catholicism in England. Nevertheless, their platform was large enough to also address Tory and High Church issues. Letters to the universities largely concerned the maintenance of high Anglican interests and resolved to block both the separation of university property from church lands and heretical philosophy in the universities. Indeed, behind these concessions to the revolutionary settlements, the fundamental assumptions of legality and constitutionality in the Stuart declarations rested on an ancient precedent of hereditary authority. Both James II and James III harnessed this sense of Anglican institutional stability to argue for the restoration of English rights and liberties. The rhetoric, of course, of 1688-89 coming to the forefront. Ironically, even in the upheaval of the 1690s. James II promised in his 1696 declaration to England to restore and support the ancient order of England through a liberal and parliamentary means. James promised 3 concessions to the Protestant parliamentary agenda. First, he would not only call a free parliament, but also take seriously its proposals, something which, of course, the early Stuarts did not, in fact, do. Second, he pledged to lessen land taxes and reduce the centralization of government. In so doing, James appealed to Whiggish Jacobites, who feared that William and Mary's administration were more centralized than James's old regime. Third, James vaguely promised freedom of religion, rights as citizens, and properties as free men. Yet he still insisted on the strict recognition of his hereditary right to the throne and buttressed hereditary social order through heraldic peerage. Just before issuing his declaration, James II created a warrant for his illegitimate son, Henry Fitzjames, under the title of Baron of Romney. Likewise, James certified the ancestry of Elizabeth Butler, the Duchess of Ormond. James's aversion to social upheaval, its damage to hierarchical structures and deprivation of liberty of the individual led him to justify Stuart legitimacy from both a pre-national, or what we might say a hereditary perspective, and also from the vantage point of revolutionary ideals. Thus, James explained the national structures in church and state, the liberties of citizenship would coexist in his restoration, that he would establish legal provisions for, as he put it, the full enjoyment of all their legal rights, privileges, and immunities, and in the secure possession of all their churches, universities, colleges, and schools, and that upon all vacancies of bishoprics and other dignitaries and benefices, to the end that all our subjects may live easily, that we shall likewise with all earnestness recommend it to our ensuring Parliament, that by their advice such a liberty of conscience may be settled. And for those of you who know, of course, the concept of liberty of conscience, Protestant rights and liberties, is something which actually gives birth to the Revolution of 1688. James's version of constitutionality required a strong national church tied to parliamentary opinion and an Anglican presence in universities as an institutional safeguard for the people's legal rights, as he saw it. Perhaps in emphasizing the Church of England alongside liberty of conscience, James suggested that he would not institutionalize Catholicism again, and would simultaneously leave Anglicanism institutionally intact and grant more liberty to dissenters. Of course, his platform would have been highly suspicious, coming from an exiled court in a Catholic nation of France. In January 1715, James III's declaration to the English people fleshed out specific issues relating to the legitimacy of the Church of England. Unlike his father, James put differences of religion at the forefront and openly admitted to being raised Roman Catholic from birth. He claimed that if he ever decided to declare himself Protestant, he would only succeed in breaking the trust of his friends, bringing, of course, the scorn of his enemies. James proposed that his personal religion and his responsibility to the Anglican Church were separate, almost sort of a secular sacred dichotomy. James began a legal defense of the universities of Oxford and Cambridge in 1715, granting a notice to preserve their lands from the Hanoverian administration's efforts to diminish their land holdings and perhaps even their salaries, something which, of course, did in fact go on, the Hanoverian change in policy with regards to these institutions. In so doing, James claimed a more general defense of all Anglican institutions. Such an appeal for the preservation of intermediary institutions would help James secure a deeper level of support than on a mere political or military level. After enclosing copies of his declarations to Oxford and Cambridge, he summarized his declaration to maintain all his subjects of the Church of England in all their legal rights and in the sole possession of all their churches, schools, and seminaries of education, further promising to protect both universities and all the particular colleges and foundations in them in the full enjoyment of all their rights and privileges. This, of course, was a complete reversal of the pre-revolutionary policy of imposing Catholic masters over Oxford and Cambridge. In 1687, when James II had insisted on electing a Catholic master for Magdalen College, stiff resistance compelled him to dismiss the entire body of fellows. So we see the Stuarts backpedaling from their pre-revolutionary Catholic policies. By promising to maintain an Anglican hold over the national universities, James III inserted his agenda into secondary institutions of power in a more politically acceptable way. Through Oxford and Cambridge, he hoped to reinforce a bureaucratic means of indirectly interrupting Hanoverian power by diminishing its ability to exert political influence on higher education. Of course, the Jacobite press defied Stuart and Tory attempts to unify political theory or formulate a consistent Jacobite platform. Things get more chaotic, of course, in the public arena. The rage of party between Whig and Tory ideals took place within Jacobite journals, just as it had outside Jacobite circles. In the longest-running Jacobite newspaper, Mist's Weekly Journal, both Tory Jacobite notions of passive obedience and Whig arguments for lawful resistance played a significant role in defining the range of public opinion within English Jacobitism. A vindictive Jacobite proem entitled The Whigs' Defence of Their Loyalty ran, "Ye high church vermin, how dare ye vie with us for an extensive loyalty?" On the other hand, one author with the pseudonym Loyalty posed the following rhetorical question to the editor. "If I were a person who believed the people of this kingdom to be original of the king's power, that I am a part of the power which is king of this king, how could I go to church and promise to God in such unlimited words as is here provided for me, all loyal and dutiful obedience in him and for him to his, as I there call him, anointed servant, without being a most solemn wicked hypocrite?" Such a question represents the conflicting political interests between passive obedience in the High Church definition of divine right and, of course, the revolutionary principle of lawful resistance, a more Protestant value. An article in the London Jacobite journal Mitre and Crown presented a favourable explanation of the principle of constitutional resistance of a tyrannical monarch, but its author, like many Whiggish Jacobites, feared that the new political parliamentary establishment threatened constitutional law. He believed it possible to oppose James over matters of constitutionality without replacing the hereditary succession of the Stuart dynasty. One commentator in the Mist's retitled version, Fogg's Weekly Journal, summarised the effects of political corruption and bribery in Parliament by stating, "The Constitution itself was subverted. These men, under the notion of restoring liberty, set up a multitude of tyrants by a Parliament, or at least an assembly of men who called themselves a Parliament." He recommended more frequent elections as a remedy for corruption. And this is all taking place in a Jacobite journal. Others were less democratic in their conclusions. Tories still attacked the social contract theory of governments, which derived from popular consent. Others stood against the infamous free thinkers and referenced an expected royal visitation in the spring of 1749 to the two universities. Of course, this visitation never took place. Both church and Tory influences, as well as royal interests, were keenly felt in these debates, but the playing field for political opinion in the Jacobite press did not arrive at a popular consensus. However, Stuart declarations moved first through Tory pure circles before entering the press. Consequently, the primary connection between the Stuarts in England involved the high church elite before it connected with a Whig following. So we move from high church to the press. In both Whig and Tory circles, Jacobitism included not only Stuart interests but also party debates on how best to accomplish a conservative return to the principles of the Constitution. In the post-revolutionary era, Jacobitism eventually evolved into a conservative constitutionalism, something which was compatible to a post-revolutionary settlement. The exiled Stuart administration refined a rhetoric for the rights and liberties of Englishmen and a separate authority of the Church of England from Roman Catholic hierarchies, which echoed, of course, the martyr image of Charles I, primarily in its iconography. It clung to the hereditary form of government from the basis of constitutional precedent. This position attracted high church politicians in the Tory party who believed constitutional liberty depended on the stability of Anglican institutions. Although published in the public venue, the Jacobite Anglican platform did more to mould Tory politics into Jacobitism than to define popular Jacobite sympathies in England. Similar to the Scottish Jacobite policy, the Stuarts managed to artfully organise a set of powerful English political elite into Jacobite circles. Thank you very much.